Hey, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm doing a sew along video and I am going to be making the Petite Dressmaker Bloomfield dress. So you may have seen, if you follow me on Instagram, that I have already trialled this pattern a couple of times. I also did a video doing like a pattern fit and amends sort of video where I talked about how to adjust a bodice to your size and to your measurements, and that was working on the Bloomfield because I really wanted to get the perfect fit in order to make this project today in this video. So in this video I'm actually going to be doing a closer look at actually how to sew it together and show you some of the steps in action and all of that kind of stuff. So before I get started with the video, if you are new here, make sure to subscribe to my channel, give this video a thumbs up. I do lots of sewing vlogs, sew-alongs, tutorials, crafty videos and all that kind of fun stuff. So yeah, let's get started. Just a heads up, you might hear some sort of traffic and background noise that's being picked up by my camera. I've got my doors open in my studio. If you don't know already, if you're new here, then this sewing space is at the bottom of my garden, and in the summer months I have to have the door open, so you can hear a little bit of muffled background noise in the audio, so apologies about that. Hopefully it doesn't deter from the video. So the fabric that I'm going to be using in this video, you may have seen if you watched my fabric stash video, and it is this really cool cotton style of fabric from Ruby Star Society, and it is a Melody Miller print, so it's one of their collaborations. They collaborate a lot together on their collections, and this one was in 2019. It's been in my stash for a very long time, but I just love it so much. It's got the kind of retro phones, it's got a really gorgeous like gold sort of detail and the really cool like phones. I'm making this dress for Goodwood Revival, which is a really fun event held at Goodwood, and it's like a retro cars, fashion, there's lots of crafts and stuff like that there, and I'm going with Brogan from the Crafty Pie, and I wanted a really fun dress to wear for that occasion. So the Bloomfield seemed like a really great choice because it's that kind of retro meets modern style that I want for this particular look, and the fabric is just really fun and very me. So I've made it before, as I mentioned. I was so happy with the amends I did to the fit. I feel like it turned out perfectly. So in this video I'm going to go ahead and make it. I'm not going to be talking about the fit and stuff like that because I've got a separate video on that, but I am going to show some of the sewing steps. So what I tend to do, this is why I've got this black thing in the frame, I'm going to film it top down and show you as much of the steps as possible, so hopefully you could watch this and feel confident enough to go and make the Bloomfield for yourself. Couple of things to note: I am making the add-on pack, so I think it's View C, I believe. It's the one with the elasticated waistband at the back and the bow tie, so it's a little bow tie-up thing at the back and really easy to make. It doesn't have a zipper or any buttons, but it is lined, and there are a few little tricky bits and bobs within this pattern. The lining fabric is an anti-static lining that I got from Minerva. I always use that anti-static lining. It's a really great quality. I'll leave it links below for you guys. There's loads of different colours as well, so I just picked up the navy shade in that particular fabric, and then anything else that I mention along the way I will leave it linked below. Okay, so I've done the prep and the darts on both the lining piece and the outer piece, and I thought I would show you that in closer detail. Outer front piece, you need to put some interfacing around the neckline and then also add stay stitching, so that's what that looks like on that piece. And then the darts are sewn and ironed towards each other. We've got that outer piece, and then the lining, the same thing, stay stitching around the neckline. I haven't interfaced that one, just stay stitched, and then the darts are pointing forward. So those two are prepped and ready. And then prep work for the back bodice. So the back body looks like this, the outer pieces, and I've added interfacing to the neckline and to this bottom piece here, and you have to do it up to where that mark is on the pattern piece. I also need to add stay stitching to where that bit of interfacing stops up to the top, so I'll do that in a second. The next step is to take our lining back pieces and then our petal tie facings. This is what they look like. And we're stitching these facings right sides together to our lining with a 1 centimetre seam allowance. The seam allowance for the rest of the pattern is 5/8, but in this step it's a centimetre, so make sure when you're watching your instructions or reading through your instructions that you check, because the seam allowance does alter a little bit for the different steps. So once that is sewn, you need to trim the seam allowance down, and then you're going to press the seam allowance towards the back, away from the main fabric, so towards the lining fabric. And once pressed, you will take it to your machine and top stitch it 2 to 3 millimeters away, so that you're pressing the seam allowance to the lining. You can see what that looks like here, nice and neat. It's now time to sew the shoulders together of the front and the back pieces. So here's our back lining. I've made sure that the ties are facing inwards, right side's facing up. Take the lining piece, right side facing down on top, so right sides together. And then stitch our shoulder seams with a 5/8 seam allowance. You also need to repeat this process with the main outer pieces. Press the shoulder seam allowance of both the main and lining layers, and then lay right side facing up the main piece out and pin your lining to the main piece. You want to pin all the way around the shoulder seams and the petal ties. The only sections that will not be stitched during this is the armholes and the side seams, but you will begin stitching with a 5/8 seam allowance all the way around, and once that's done, trim off the excess seam allowance. Also clip in every sort of 1 centimetre to 2 centimetres around that curve, just to release it slightly. The ties themselves will have no understitching, but the rest of it you want to understitch the seam allowance to the lining fabric. That will stop it from rolling under and showing the lining on the front. Once that understitching is done, you can turn it to the right side and give it a nice press, making sure that your petal ties and everything is really nice and neat. Next, you want to take your skirt front piece, this is the piece that's slightly smaller than the other one, and put some gathering stitches in the top. Lay out your bodice, and you want to push the lining fabric away, and then you're just attaching that skirt front to the main front of your bodice by gathering the skirt and then pinning it in place across that front bodice waist hem. Stitch that in place with your 5/8 seam allowance. Overlock and finish that seam and then press it up towards the bodice. Then moving on to the back panel, you need to fold it under and press to create the elastic casing. It's folded over 3 centimetres and then stitch close to the finished edge, and then take your piece of elastic with a safety pin and you want to thread that through the elastic casing. And once it's all the way through, you can sort of hold it up to the back of your waist to check that you're happy with the size, and then baste the edges down 1 centimetre. On the side seams of the front of the dress, you want to mark a 2.5 centimetre or 1 inch line from the waistline, and that indicates where you're going to pin on your back skirt. And to note, the lining is also still pushed out of the way at this stage. You're then going to pin your back pieces over the top as well, so it slightly overlaps, matching all the notches up, and then you can stitch all the way down the side seams of the bodice and the skirt. Once that's done, you pin the side seams of the main and the lining bodice pieces together and stitch, turn it inside out like this, and then you're left with that last bit of lining sort of open. And now it's a little bit tricky, but you pin the lining to the waistband. It should overlap ever so slightly, and you're going to make sure that you're pinning through the other side where the seam is, so it's kind of leading to being able to stitch in the ditch. What that means is you will then stitch through the front and it will stitch the lining in place. Once this is done, it's time to put on our skirt here and gather that in. You do this by sewing the rectangles together at the side seams, adding gathering stitches to the top and then putting it in the skirt. Hello, so it is check-in time, and the dress is coming together so nicely. I've just put in the skirt gathers, really easy to do. It was just a case of gathering the top of the rectangle and attaching it to the top of the bodice, making sure that the lining was out of the way, and then putting the skirt ruffle on. Then obviously taking that lining piece and the bodice lining piece and putting that all together. So I hope you found that useful, seeing all of that. The next step is the sleeves, so I'm very excited to start on the sleeves. They do take a little bit of time because you have to put together the sleeve lining and the sleeve, insert elastic and all of that kind of stuff before putting it into the actual dress. With the sleeves you want to sew the underarm seam, which is that short seam, on both the lining and outer pieces. Once that's done, trim off the excess seam allowance and press the underarm seam allowance for the main and lining layers open, and then you're going to turn the main sleeve inside out and turn the sleeve linings right side out. Matching up the corresponding notches, you need to insert the sleeve linings into the main sleeve so that they all match up around the hem of the sleeve. You're then going to stitch that with a 5/8 seam allowance and then finish it off in the overlocker without trimming off any excess. You want to make sure that you've got a nice amount left over like this. You need to press the seam allowance towards the lining. You can see in the clip here I'm doing it towards the outer, but I soon realised that I did this wrong. I just didn't manage to film it. But make sure it's pressed towards the lining, and then you're going to stitch all the way around, leaving a opening to insert your elastic. It's a little bit fiddly, but using a safety pin you can thread your elastic, and then once the elastic is in, obviously finish off the hole, and then you're going to pin the top of the armhole together and add gathering stitches through the lining and the outer. Once that's all done, you can insert your sleeve into your bodice like so. You're going to stitch through all the layers of lining and outer fabrics and just finish that edge with your overlocker, and yeah, that's done. Once your sleeves are in, you just need to hem up the skirt as well if you haven't already, and you have a finished dress. So here is how my dress turned out. I'm so pleased with it. It fits perfectly and I just think the finish is stunning. Such a beautiful pattern, and one I'll definitely be making again and again. So here's the finished dress. I hope you love it as much as I do. So I didn't actually get to wear it to Goodwood in the end because we had a sudden heat wave in the UK and it was just so hot. It was like 30 plus. And sadly it didn't get the outing that all the hard work went into for obviously the special occasion and everything. But I'm just so happy with the finished result, and if you watched my prior video, which was all about the fitting process and how I did some sort of pattern amendments to fit it properly, you'll see all the hard work that went into that process. So I did about, I think in the end I did 3 toiles, 2 for fitting and then a wearable toile, which is what I show in that video. And then obviously this is number 4, and I'm so pleased with how it fits. I don't think I've ever made a dress that fits as well as this one, and obviously because of the tie up back it means that you can really like cinch it in and it just sort of hugs in all the right places. I absolutely love it, and the skirt is really beautiful. It's just the right amount of puff without creating too much bulk around the stomach. So yeah, it just cuts in all the right places. It does come in a petite and a standard frame, and that's what I absolutely was loving about this pattern, is because it is drafted to a more petite frame. I didn't have to do any amendments or adjustments in terms of the height, which in a lot of patterns I usually have to take off like an inch or 2 to the height of the bodice. So as you can see, it fits on my waist perfectly, and if anything it's actually a little bit too short in the body. But that's because I adjusted it on the shoulders, but it's, you know, it sits perfectly on my waist. The sleeves are gorgeous, and the extra gather, so you can hear cars, but the extra gather in the sleeve head works really well on this pattern. If you watched my previous video you would have seen me mentioning about bringing the gather a little bit lower because I had more fabric to sort of put in there. So it's worked out really, really well, and I'm really pleased with it, and I hope you enjoyed seeing the process of the sewing steps and what that looked like. And yeah, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you do make the Petite Dressmaker Bloomfield and you've been inspired by my sew along video, then make sure to tag me in your makes as well. I'd love to see them. And yeah, thank you so much for watching, you guys. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe, give this video a thumbs up, and I'll see you next time. Bye!